So welcome to It's Not All About the Numbers, the leadership podcast that doesn't just focus on the bottom line. Hi, my name is Chris, and that is Mike.
Hi, everyone.
And your co-host today is a career changer called Chris Argent. You may have heard about him, but we're going to do a special today because July and August is full of holidays. We're also taking a break, but we do want to commit to giving you a podcast every week to make sure that you subscribe and you hit those 5 stars. So today is going to be a bit of an interesting reflection on my career and definitely as a career changer. And this kind of started with a few weeks ago when Mike was invited to talk about his career at the summit that we run. And we thought it was such a great session, very well received, that we'd have a little look at mine as a career changer. So, and Mike is here today, right?
Yeah, we're in the same room in Southampton. You may or may not be able to hear that music in the gym has just started up in the background, so that's going to be fun.
Perfect timing.
But yeah, no, I thought that why should it just be me that talks about my career? I think that we did a session right back at the start of the podcast with Matt Buck, where he pointed out that we both had different paths to get to where we are. So I think digging into some of your career and your decisions would be really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And this isn't going to be like, a Chris Fest. I am going to try and sort of explain a few decisions and models that I used and made, because I actually, as Matt said, I was quite structured in how I went about this change, whereas Mike was just dodging bullets by the looks of it.
Very flighty,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I wondered just to sort of kick us off and sort of scene set a bit, it'd be really interesting to know, how did you end up working in finance?
So first of all, it's worth explaining that finance in my world is not financial services. It's not banking, even though I did work for a bank for a few years. It is the business accountant. It's the side of accountancy under the CFO in most businesses. So we sort of refer to it as finance, but it's accounting and finance in business. And this goes way back. This reminds me a little bit of the conversation we had with Chris Ortega, who talked about, being a kid and his mum reminding him that his initials were CEO and how he was going to be great one day. And my father was a CFO, finance director at the time. The CFO term wasn't really used. And I remember being in sort of primary school even, and trying to picture where he worked and how he worked. And I think I'd started watching loads of, great 1980s sort of American exports. Probably Dallas was in there and Dynasty was in there. Not that I was a huge fan, but they were like, these powerful business leaders. And I think that it ignited something really sort of fun in me, which was, what's my future working environment going to be like? What's the office going to be like? What's what's the view from the office? And I thought my route to get to that place was working in business and being a professional. And I think fast forward sort of 17 odd years, I think mid-20s, I was I went on the same career path as my dad, basically. He was encouraging me to do my exams. He was encouraging me to, be a business accountant. He saw it as a very safe job. You're the last person out the door. You're the first person in as a company grows. And yeah, I think it was almost in the blood because my brother's a CFO, and my grandmother was a computer. One of the first, manual sort of computers that worked on computers before they were machines.
So we talked in a previous podcast with Sarah Corman around, she knew at the age of 7 she wanted to be an accountant, but was encouraged through school to not necessarily go on and study accountancy directly, but to do something hard at university. What you sped through 17 years there very quickly. So what was from that kind of small kid looking at your dad's office thinking, I want a bit of that, to actually being in that office? What was the path between those two places? Did you do something hard?
So no, I didn't. Well, I did something hard in that I failed a lot. So one of the reasons I think why I'm so structured about what I do today is because when I was at school and when I was in my early career, I was completely unstructured and it led to failure. So I, first of all, didn't do very well in my GCSEs. I had to go back and do my GCSEs when people were studying from their A levels. I then tried to I compounded the issue trying to do GCSEs and A levels at the same time. Then I didn't do very well in my A levels. And then it dawned on me when all of my friends were going off to university that I didn't make the grade because I didn't have a plan. I didn't have an approach or a structure to it. I just thought, if I get on really well with my teachers, I'm going to get a good grade, because I'm a sort of relationship person first. And it was ridiculous, and I don't quite know what happened because my dad was a professional. And I certainly didn't get the sort of guidance at that point. But I remember sort of thinking, okay, I need to turn this around. I started going to night school to do the AAT, who I'm proud to say I'm now a trustee of and a director of the AAT. And then when I passed that qualification, I went on to do the ACCA. And I had quite a structured approach in my early career. But again, that was almost like the self-development that I learned from failure at school. The professional development still had a long way to go, though, because in my 20s in work, again, I really wasn't thinking about career path and career direction. I was just sort of thinking, does this sound good? Does this sound like a good job? I'm a derivatives accountant in a bank. Yeah, this sounds impressive. Am I getting paid enough? All the wrong sort of things to focus on. Obviously money is great, but what about my strengths, my motivations, where I want to go with it? And I think I cracked one half of the equation in terms of education, personal education, even though I didn't fully qualify, and some people might be surprised at that. I almost have a resentment towards the audit profession because there's one accounting paper after me taking 13 odd papers called the Advanced Audit and Assurance paper that I took 3 times and failed 3 times. And it was the Big Four paper. It was the paper that you had to take if you wanted to work for the Big Four. And I didn't. I wanted to work in business. I wanted to be my own boss. I wanted to add value in a different way. And I resented having to take this paper. I could never knuckle down to it, and the result was there. The lack of result was there. So I felt like I kind of cracked the education side of things and a bit of personal development, but I hadn't developed on the career side until probably late 20s, when I had a bit of an epiphany. I did stop working and I went traveling for a year. And actually it gave me a time to reassess, find out who Chris was. And I kind of came back and went on a career change.
So what was the moment, or what was the thing that made you take that year out and go travel?
So I was made redundant actually, from the bank I was working in, CIBC World Markets. It's massive retail bank in Canada. They had an investment arm and I really enjoyed the people that I worked with. I enjoyed the environment. I enjoyed the salary, but I really didn't fit in there in terms of the role. I remember people saying to me, you shouldn't be working here. You should be working in a different sort of business, blah, blah, which I just shrugged off and made sure we went to lunch and went to the pub after work and all that sort of stuff. So when I was made redundant, it was just like a forced moment of reflection. I knew that I wanted to go traveling. I was in a bit of a rut personally. I had a great sort of fun life playing rugby socially, but I wasn't in a relationship at that point. And I thought, right, let's go away. And as a good trip to Asia does over, 12 months, I had a chance to sort of think, let's reset and go again.
That's really interesting. It's almost like that cataclysmic redundancy moment where nobody expects it necessarily, and it comes, and it's like, oh, you've got to change. You've got to do something different because it's forced upon you. But when you were traveling and you were going around and seeing all these different things, how did you go about reflecting? And the reason I asked that question is I did something a little bit similar. Between university and getting the job, I went to Belize and went scuba diving, but there was loads of downtime. And I remember really clearly now sitting on the end of a pier on an island in Belize, dangling my feet, listening to Skunk and Nancy on my headphones, thinking, why have I signed up to become a teacher? And then literally having an epiphany whilst I'm out there, really like, I really don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, in that year, did you have any moments like that where you really consciously were thinking about career?
Yeah, I did. Being really honest, I think the redundancy led to a bit of a depression, to be honest with you. I felt like I'd lost a lot of stuff. I'd lost money, status. I'd lost sort of all these things. And I thought, right, let's just get away. And what I realized when I was traveling, not necessarily focused on career at first, but I realized how unimportant those things were to getting on with people, getting on with your life, getting on generally. So I think what happened over a few months without me realizing it is my priorities changed. So I was like, what is it that is going to make me happy? What are my strengths? I know we talked about this, with John Lees, I think only last week, that, if I think I was trying to develop my weaknesses instead of focus on my strengths. And I think there was a point where I thought, what, if I keep doubling down on my strengths, I'm going to get a lot further than this. So I think there was definitely a sort of a transition. But I don't think there was a meeting or a temple moment where I went, right, okay, I've been struck by the hand of Buddha in Bangkok, and I need to do something completely different. I just think my priorities changed, and when I came back to England, I was committed to a plan that I'd made, on probably a 30-hour train ride in India or China. And I really wanted to stick to it.
So I mean, that's really interesting in itself. So you said in that two things, which I thought were fascinating, which is there wasn't a temple moment, but on a 30-hour train journey, I did come up with a plan.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like there's a contradiction in there somewhere. But how did you go? What took me through that plan bit? What did you do? How did you come up with a plan?
So I think so when I was away, you've got a lot of time to yourself. I was away for a whole year. I was independent traveling in India and China, mainly Southeast Asia. So you try and find things to do. And I remember I used to be a martial artist when I was a kid. I did it, for a number of years, and I loved it. And when I was in Asia, I was like, right, I'm going to go and do some Tai Chi, and I'm going to go and do this and that. And you end up being quite reflective because the tutors that you find are like, they're living a lifestyle that is, but it's also their career.
Mm-hmm.
It's how they make money. And I've mentioned this in the past, and to be honest, I only found out about this after I went traveling, and it just sort of fits now. But this ikigai kind of concept, which came from Japan, I think I was starting to sort of, work on that model, which is, what are my strengths? What does the world need? What do I love doing? What am I going to get paid for? And if you map that out as a bit of a Venn diagram, the closer you can get to the middle, the more fulfilled you're going to be in your career. Interestingly, in Japan, they use it more for like hobbies and things like that. And in the West, it's almost like this is your new career, find your ikigai. So I think it's a great reference, but I wouldn't say it's the perfect model. But I went on a bit of a journey and started mapping out a plan of how I'm going to prioritize Chris and how I'm going to move towards Chris's strengths and how I'm going to move towards an industry that is possibly more suited for me, rather than, quite frankly, the boring job that I had. And I always laugh about this, and I know a few people have picked up on this in the past, but I used to call myself the reluctant accountant after my friend named me that. And I was like, no. And I actually found the email the other week because I was pulling something out. I went back to him and said, he was doing a photographic project, and he took a photo of me and he labeled it the reluctant accountant. And it's me on the steps of the Spice Girls. If you've seen the Spice Girls video, Tell Me What You Want, they're in this hotel and they come down the stairs. I'm actually stood on the same stairs, looking sort of quite depressed, I'd say. Nothing like the Spice Girls.
Not in the video.
Yeah. I wasn't in the video. No. That wasn't why I was depressed. But again, I was just sort of questioning what I was doing, and I said, "Can you change the title to inspirational accountant?" And he was like, "No, I'm not going to do that." He totally ignored me, and I was like, but he knew something about me, I think, in my current career path that I didn't recognize in myself. So when I came back, I was just committed to make that change.
So that's brilliant. I love the reluctant accountant. It's quite often that others have a vision into us that we can't see. I mean, and I think, again, we touched on that with John Lees around coaching and how actually a coach is somebody who asks you questions that you should be asking yourself, but you don't.
Yeah.
And I think it's almost, you're describing something similar with that photograph. I think when you came back, what did you then do? What was the steps?
So first of all, I had to make some money. So I accepted that I needed to go back into my current role. Like I would have loved to, and I think this is where a lot of people make, an error in career change. They make a hard stop, cold turkey, right? I'm going to move into a new position. And actually I found, a career sort of change approach, which is a sort of, 4-box matrix where you sort of move one step at a time to make this full change. And I accepted I'm going to have to go back into my current role as, an accountant in finance, and I'll be working for somebody else. That's what I do. So, and that was my starting point, just really to get some money to make the next move, because I knew I was probably going to have to take a hit in my salary to make this change. Not necessarily, but I thought at the time I was going to. The other thing that I did, which was a little bit random, was I went on a coaching course. And I think, if I, again, be really honest, I thought I was going to be some kind of career coach or life coach or something. And I'm so glad I'm not. But I thought I'd do that career coaching course. And it gave me a lot of sort of insights into myself. It ended up being all about myself rather than me trying to help others, which I think is fine, a good reason to go on a coaching course. But after I'd sort of done that first step, there was basically 2 decisions I could have made. And this comes back to the model, the matrix model that I used. I could either move sort of internally in the industry into a different position. So I could have stayed in accounting and tried to find another role that best suited me, or I could have gone into a completely different industry as an accountant. So, and my major goal was really to be my own boss, running a company in a sort of in an area that suited me.
Did you still have an eye on that corner office that your dad had with the big desk and looking out?
Not so much. No, not so much, because it was all about feeling. Then it was like what felt right to me. What was going to be, a strength. A personal strength isn't, do I have a corner office or not? A personal strength is, do I love going to work?
Yeah.
It's, do I enjoy what I'm doing? What can I offer? How can I support people? That was sort of my approach.
And that's it. But just reflecting on that, that's a really interesting change, right? I mean, I realised it wasn't.
Yeah.
You've gone from it's almost like the trappings of the role being the motivation to actually it's the role itself that needs to be the motivation. I know that's a change.
Yeah. So totally. I people some people just see it, they live to work. Some people work to live. I think I'm probably, you know, a bit, I'm more on the sort of work to live, but it still means that work is important. I have a family now. They're the number one priority, but all the decisions I make are business wise are still considering my family, as a number one thing. So, but I had this sort of goal to be my own boss, doing something that's more aligned to myself. And like I said, I could have just stopped. And I think a lot of people make this mistake where they say, right, I'm just going to stop and I'm going to try and be something else. And it's so hard to make that work. It's the hardest path, really, to just, stop and be something completely different. So what I ended up doing was I thought, you know what, I can't magic up a more senior or appropriate role in the accounting industry. I couldn't be let's say I was a finance director, right, at the time. And there was a trigger actually that kind of led to me actually really pressing the button on all this stuff, which I've talked about in the past, the fraud. But I could have tried to have found, a different role within accounting. I could have tried to sort of say, well, maybe I take a step down into something that I love a bit more, which didn't feel right. So anyway, the career path that I took or the change path that I took was using all of my financial management skills, my personal skills, my change management skills, to actually move from accounting into strategy and consulting. And I ended up landing on finance transformation as the first step to this new career. I worked on programs of work. I worked on, I wanted to be sort of seen as a progressive leader. I wanted to be part of the solution rather than the problem of all this poor process and, a lack of kind of insight and data in accounting at the time. I wanted to make change. And that was the best way for me to do it. That first step was to sort of take all of those skills and add them to my strengths and try and find a role in that space. And fortunately enough for me, I presented myself well enough to land a couple of brilliant transition roles at some massive companies like, John Lewis and Amazon, to really sort of help me on my way. So that was kind of the first step.
I've heard of them. They're reasonable. They're reasonable sized organisations. Yeah. I think there's something you mentioned earlier about a Venn diagram where you're reflecting on different things, and in the middle of that Venn diagram is the thing that you should be focusing on. I think we've talked before about transformation and how transformation is a process. It's not an outcome necessarily in itself.
Yeah.
But within that process, there's a Venn diagram of changing technology, changing processes, but also helping people change. And I think you've said a number of times through this conversation about the relationships being key to you.
Yeah.
You right at the very start, all the way through, you've said relationships at different times. And for me, that's the key to transformation. And it's almost like you landed on the one thing that was happening in business, where relationships were key.
Yeah, and my starting point, it was almost like in finance, relationship was not expected to be important. I remember people walking in my early career, people walking into the accounts department or the finance function, and people calling us the library, or it's the place where no one's spoke, and it's like it's hard to build relationships if you're not communicating. And this is long before messaging and instant messaging and all the collaboration tools, right?
You're still sending memos.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, faxes. So, but it bothered me, because like I remember but just before I went traveling, actually, I remember going home like for over a couple of months, being so frustrated with the lack of business partnering that I felt was needed to make the job that I was doing important, in terms of insight and value and relationships. I would count the number of words that people had spoken to me during the day, and it was always under 10, for a very, very long time, and here I am now talking for a living practically, right? So I was frustrated in that role for sure.
No, it's really, I think that's just so fascinating how clearly you can see what your strengths are now, right? Your strengths in that communication, engagement, bringing people together. How the hell did you end up in a place where nobody was talking to each other? It's almost, it's so
Yeah, it's crazy.
counterintuitive.
But the thing is, I think a lot of people, they do what they think is the right thing. They take the next step on the ladder. The accounting career path is very structured, and it's barely evolved in like 100 years, right? It's evolving fast now, but it's barely evolved. So I think at the time I was just sort of like I said, chasing the wrong things, the corner office, the next step up, um, and not really majoring on my strengths. Now, there are roles today that exist in accounting and finance that require you to be a communicator, require you to be a translator, as you call it, right? And maybe I would have done better if I had started today in the same career. But that first transition role really exploited all of those strengths because I had to stakeholder manage. I started to retrain in change and program management and loved it. I would have to build relationships to make sure that things were going to be adopted. And I learned again through success and failure because the first program that I ran at a small company was a fantastic guide to how you make change, and then nothing happened. Right? So it was like I'd written the paper for them, but then I'd forgotten to get them to adopt it. And then I learned from that. Then we went into John Lewis. I basically had two programs back to back. The first one was a huge success where we really landed a lot of change, a lot of collaboration, a lot of great stakeholder management across the whole team. It definitely wasn't just down to me. A lot of technology coming in. The second one I thought was going to go just as well, but the head of the program was different communication style, less of a shadow network. I think they were talking shadow organization understanding, and we talked about that before. And no matter how much I tried to manage stakeholders, there were blockers which weren't being managed. So that ended up being a bit like the first one. We brought in an amazing bit of technology, but then no one adopted it. And it's probably, it's unused, so it's a waste of money. But I was moving towards understanding what this new career could look like for me. And then the ultimate move, which was, the being my own boss, using all of these strengths, using all of this sort of subject matter expertise, was me eventually building a community saying, right, okay, let's meet up to talk about these subjects as an industry. Let's sort of talk about progressive leadership and how we can make change, and setting up these side events in my transition role then allows me to make the big step to be MD of Generation CFO, which is what I am today. I'm very proud of it. I love what I do now. I hope people can hear it in what I say, and how much I talk about it. And when I'm hosting and hosting, CFOs from progressive companies, big brands coming to the awards. I'm so proud of the community that's there, and it's supportive to each other, and the content that there's so much in there that I absolutely love. But rewind 10 years, when I came back from traveling, if I wanted to make that single move, I'm going to just set up a community and be an MD of my own community, it's impossible. You can't do it that way. So I think I took a very structured approach to career change, and I learned a lot from that process.
There's something really, well, there's lots really interesting in there, but there's something I just want to scratch at in there, which is you just mentioned there that you couldn't have made that leap to doing like the Gen CFO community work straight away. I'm working on projects at the moment where people come into roles to do transformation very junior.
Yeah.
So they're not junior in terms of their capability, but in terms of their experience. And I just wondered if what you're saying is there's a real link to almost like you need the foundations and you need an expertise and an experience in something to then be able to step into a transformation role, because it's almost like you've got the grey in the beard that shows that you've had things that haven't gone right. You've learned a bit about that, but you also understand how fundamentally the profession works. So then you can be this community builder, leader, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
I just wonder if there's something in that about how we do transformation and we bring people into transformation now.
Yeah, I think transformation is so complex, and every transformation is different. I think that's really the key to anyone working in transformation, to be adaptable.
But that's a learned thing, right? That's not how transformation gets taught, inverted commas. Transformation gets taught as it's a process. You follow the process equals successful transformation.
Oh my God, that's complete rubbish. Yeah.
Well, yeah. But that's learned.
So much, like, this is a whole other podcast, but there's there's the public view of transformation, and then there's what really goes on.
Yeah.
Right. And one thing that I sometimes talk about when people ask me about transformation is, how did it work and how did it not work, and how can I stack the cards in my favor? And one of the approaches that I favor is that you need to set up two programs in one. And when I say programs, it doesn't have to be a huge amount of resource. It's just like have two goals running at the same time. One is a long-term goal, one is a short-term goal. And the short-term goals are really there to, be the public face of change. It's like, oh, things are changing. Things have happened again this month. Things are, really taking place in that team. And it's about building momentum, winning hearts and minds, making sure that people are involved in the change. The second change, which I think is what a lot of people focus on when it comes to transformation, is the longer term change with maybe the larger benefits, but it's too long. It's, you get change fatigue in that one. So you have to keep people motivated. So I think there's a double, there's a double-pronged approach to transformation, which is a sort of public and private face to it. And if you don't get that part right, then, I don't think it will work, because things will be seen as too long, too technology focused, not about the people, not involving the people, not making change, and people start to lose faith in it.
So I completely agree. And my observation on sort of that the bit of your story that I know, which is that transition from being a transformation finance person doing the do to the GENCFO MD that's helping others do the do.
Yeah.
That is you sharing that experience through many different routes to help everybody else get that point and understand that point.
Yeah. Well, I walked the talk, right? I had my two-pronged approach, and I had a finance transformation career, which was becoming more about edge technology, like analytics and data science and all this great stuff. AI. I was talking about AI in finance, but people would laugh at me. And now what? Everyone's using it, right? So I had the sort of the hard career and I was publicly saying, this is the direction I'm going on. I'm going to get up to, transformation director, and then come back in as a CFO at one point. But on the side of that, I was developing this community, with these hard learned lessons, trying to find like-minded people. And by the way, that journey was 15 years in the making to today. So until I actually opted for the final career move, it was 10 years. So I've been doing GenCFO as an MD now for 5. So it took me 10 years to sort of set it up. But it was, now I'm really, really doing it. And I've got another 10 years ahead of me easily, probably even more with the size of mortgage that I've got. So I
thought you were going to say something like with the healthcare system and medical developments, it might last longer.
Yeah, I'll live forever. And that's another thing, right? Just to wrap this up, looking forward, I don't see myself retiring from what I'm doing today, because why would I?
Yeah,
I find it so motivating. If I was still in accounting as an FD, I couldn't wait to get that final paycheck and to sail off into the sunset. Now I feel like I have this passion project that I'm completely aligned to. I feel everything that I say is authentic about it, and I get up out of bed and I want to do it. And and by the way, I have a career out of it. You know, it's completely the opposite way around.
It's brilliant. I'm conscious. I want to use a Chris quote here, which is, "I'm conscious of time."
Oh, right. Yeah,
I'm conscious of time. And I mean, that's just been such a fascinating insight into the journey that you've taken. And I think if I was to sort of play back to you what I've heard over that last sort of half hour or so, it's you're seen as a successful person by your community, clearly. And so, but the message for me is successful people all have a journey. And we found that out for all of the podcasts that we've done, is that everyone's been on a journey to get to where they are. And quite often that journey is hidden. But sometimes that story and how people have gone on that journey is as important as where they've ended up in terms of or what you just said. It's quite powerful. I can't see myself retiring. That's quite a powerful statement, right? And I think that comes from your journey and what you've learned, and the fact that what you're doing now is your passion.
Yeah, and I've been fortunate enough for it to be successful, right, as well.
But you've put the yards in.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I absolutely stand by that. It's not just for the podcast. I don't see myself retiring because I really enjoy what I do every day. Long may it continue. But you did steal my line, and I am conscious of time as well. So thanks for being a good interviewer.
Enjoyed it. That was fun.
You pulled out a few things out of me there that I probably have never said publicly before. But that's thank you from me. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, everyone.
And remember, it's not all about the numbers.